Today's video. So thanks for joining me. I'm going to do a bit of a walkthrough and a speed edit on a digital art piece I did, which is this one. So I painted this piece in Photoshop with the mixer brush. This is a photo that I took a little while ago of David Kennedy, and we had him just dressed up sort of a bit like an urban cowboy. He brought along his guitar, and yes, he can play it. And we were having a terrific photo shoot, but there was just something about this image that I really wanted to take a little bit further. So let's jump over into Photoshop and I'll start walking you through it. Okay, so to start with, I did a duplicate copy. I also did use the quick selection tool and did a subject select. I then copied that onto a new fresh layer. So once I had done that, I went back to my background layer and I blurred. What I actually did was another subject selection and then delete and fill, and then I blurred that just to give me a nice plain background. I could have just put a solid color background, but I sort of liked the gradient that was there. I just wanted to remove some of the details. I still wanted the color, the light, the shadow, etc. So now I had my background prepped. I had my base layer. I then put in a new blank layer and I renamed them. So I had one as my base or background and the other one as my painting layer. I can then go and grab the mixer brush and I can start painting. I generally like to start with the eyes if I'm working on a face, but it really doesn't matter where you start. I do like to zoom in close and use a smaller brush. I find using a smaller brush allows me to pick up more details. The base layer, I will drop the opacity down so that I can paint in, and I just work my way through, remembering with the eyes that you need to paint in the direction of the detail of the pupil, the iris, paint in the whites of the eyes, and also to paint in the eyelashes and things like that as well. Okay, so once I've got the eye done, I can then pull out a little bit. I can check some details. Turning on and off your background layer shows you where you may have missed some of the spots, so that's always a good thing to do. You can change and use different brushes. That's completely up to you. There are so many different brushes that are available, but I do like to just stick to my main sort of complexion brush that I tend to use a lot. And I'll go back in and I'll paint any of the bits that I have missed. I'll then come in and I'll start working my way around the face. Remember, if you're working on skin, especially things like lips and things like that, paint them in the direction that they naturally appear. So like with the top lip and the bottom lip, I usually sort of paint up and down and then across on the edges. So painting in the direction of the little folds in the lip and things like that will stop it from blurring and smudging together, and it looks a little bit more natural. I'll then come in and start painting in the details of the hat. So you've got different textures here, so I would work along the edges of the hat, and then I will sort of do a cross hatch or a stipple, or I will go one way then the other, just following the direction that a lot of the texture is going. Once I've got the hat done, I will then come back and move across to the other side of the face, painting in the ears, the cheek, the eyes, etc., and working my way through that. Facial hair and eyebrows and eyelashes and things like that can be a little tricky to work with. I find just short stabby strokes work really well for just stubble, whereas you probably want something a little more flowing for hair or eyelashes, even eyebrows. And sometimes when it comes to like the neckline and things like that, I just tend to sort of paint the edges in, and I will just paint the rest of it in as skin and work my way through that. Starting on the jacket and the clothes, especially with the jacket, there's lots of folds and stitching, so make sure that I follow all of those, the stitching, the folds, the creases, and paint all those in the direction that they're flowing, and I feel that it tends to work in quite well. Even with the t-shirt, I will follow the seam lines and the folds and things like that in the t-shirt. So when it comes to the guitar, it's a little bit on the tricky side, but I felt that if I just followed the grain of the wood as much as I could, then that would give me the most natural look for the wood of this timber. I often find painting hands can be a little bit on the difficult side, so I like to really sort of slow down and pay close attention to as many of the details as I can. When you're working with the mixer brush, it's really easy to get all of those details muddied up, especially when you've got veins in the hands, you've got fingernails, creases in the knuckles and things like that. So I like to pay a little bit closer attention to those as I paint. the strings were another bit that sort of got a little bit muddy, so I started sort of going lengthways and then doing the frets as they came down. I found that that was sometimes a little bit muddy, so I'd sort of delete that and come back and do a bit more. So I was sort of going backwards and forwards with the strings on the guitar. Don't forget to save your piece as you go, but it's also a really good idea to just double check if there are any bits that you're missing. You may not see it initially, but if you turn off your background layer, you'll see where you haven't quite painted. So it's a really good idea to come back in and touch those up, because if you decide that you want to print this off, then it really does show through. So just turning that layer on and off, dropping the opacity, allows you to come in and fix those areas. So once I'd pretty much got that done, I then went and grabbed this texture that is in my Fine Arts texture collection, and I brought that in and I placed it in the background of my image. It doesn't matter that it was a little bit small, I've just stretched it out so it fits the image. It's going to go into the background anyway, so it really doesn't make a huge amount of difference. I then, as I said, stretched that out, put it in the background, and I changed the blend mode to soft light and set that in that way, and that just gave a really nice bit of definition to the image overall. I then went into my adjustment layers and I added a pattern layer. I went into my legacy patterns and I chose an artist canvas. If you haven't got your legacy settings, you can generally tend to find them online, so I just went in, picked one. I was playing around, trying a few different ones. Trying to make my mind up and decided on that one. I can then change the blend mode to soft light or hard light. You can try a few different ones, and I could soften it down. I also found it was still just a little bit strong when I zoomed in, so I ended up going up to filter and just doing a little bit of a blur on that as well. So just a touch, just to soften it up. I did have to convert it from a smart object, and sometimes you have to do that when you bring in adjustment layers. So just a touch of a blur, just to soften it off just a little bit. I also wanted to use the filter gallery, but because this is 16-bit, I had to go and change the image to an 8-bit. So I went up here, went into my image settings and changed the mode to 8-bit. Then I could go into my filter gallery in Photoshop, which won't let you do 16-bit or higher. So I was then playing around with lots and lots of different brush filters and things like that to find one that I found I liked, to give a little bit more of that painterly touch. I then ended up creating a new layer, and I went in with just a soft white brush and I just popped in a few little highlights. I then also slightly blurred those, and I changed the opacity and the blend modes in those just to soften them up even more. Next I went into my actions and I chose my dodge and burn action, which just sets up two curves layers, one light, one dark, both with inverted masks. And then I just went through with a normal brush, not my mixer brush, just my normal brush, and I painted in all the shadows and highlights, or the dodge and burn, as I wished to. Was to merge everything onto a new layer, and then I blurred that all the way, so that just gives a beautiful sort of color toning to the image. I put it on soft light at 48%. I did those highlights as I said. I then went through, I added this texture and I masked it out of my image, so that's it there. I just found that it just needed a little bit more colour and oomph into the background, even though I had prepped it for the grey. But I was really happy with the overall look to it. And that's pretty much the finished image. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time on YouTube. Bye for now.